Rain slammed down on the sagging awnings of Franklin Market. Rusted signs clanged against one another, their metallic cries echoing like laments inside the storm. The last street lamp flickered weakly, its yellow glow smeared by the downpour, casting a blurred light over a sight that could stop any breath in the throat. A Doberman puppy. He lay sprawled on the frozen slab of concrete, drenched to the bone, legs trembling uncontrollably. The floodwater dragged mud and trash against his body, pinning him in place as his tiny belly rose and fell in painful bursts. His eyes reflected nothing but a cloudy haze, blind, utterly defenseless in the heart of the storm. But the cruelty was not only in his frailty. Around his neck clung a band of cold iron, pressed deep into tender flesh. On that collar, raised markings formed a strange pattern. Rain drummed against it, spelling out a secret no one had meant to read. Thunder cracked open the sky. The puppy flinched, tried to lift his head, and released a strangled whimper that vanished into the wind. So faint it almost wasn't there, yet it sounded less like pain and more like a plea, not for himself, but as if begging the world not to turn away again. That was when a sweep of white light cut through the rain. The headlights of an old truck lumbered around the corner, tires grinding against the current. The door burst open, and Dr. Nathaniel Nate Hayes jumped out, his coat drenched within seconds. A man in his 40s, tall, broad-shouldered, carrying in his eyes the hollow weight of someone who had lost more than he cared to remember. His flashlight sliced across the deserted market. Then it stopped. And so did he, a fragile body shivering on the ground. Blind eyes turned toward the beam, waiting, almost inviting, the final blow. Oh God. Nate dropped to his knees. His hand, shaking, brushed against the soaked fur. The puppy recoiled, but instead of biting or bolting, he pressed his head into Nate's palm. That frail gesture tightened something inside the man's chest, like a thread pulled taut. The beam slid across the collar. Nate froze. His fingers traced the surface, feeling the raised dots under his skin. Not scratches, not random marks. Braille. A message meant for touch, not sight. A chill surged down his spine. Who would do this? Who would carve a secret message into the collar of a blind dog, then abandon him to a storm? He lifted the pup into his arms. The body weighed no more than a soaked rag, breaths so faint he feared one missed moment would be the last. Nate pressed him against his chest and whispered into the roar of the rain. Not tonight. Not while I breathe. He charged back toward the truck, clutching the little body against him as the storm screamed to swallow them whole. Behind him, the night raged on, as if furious at the secret now set in motion. The rain in Ashford did not begin with peace. It started with the choked plea of a fragile life and a collar that would change everything. The veterinary clinic at the end of Harbor Road had never burned its lights this late. Outside, the storm still howled, wind shrieking through the window panes, rain hammering the tin roof like a battle drum. Inside, the cold fluorescent light glared down on the steel table, where a tiny, trembling life lay curled. Valor. The blind Doberman puppy, drenched by the rain, was now wrapped in a towel. His little chest rose and fell unevenly, his breath ragged, but his ears still stood upright as if clinging to life by sheer will alone. Dr. Nate Hayes stood over the table, eyes locked on his fragile patient. He had saved countless animals in his career, yet never had his heart felt so taut as though it might snap. He wiped mud from the soaked fur and disinfected cuts along the small body. Each time his hands brushed a wound, Valor whimpered softly, but never once did he bite or resist. He lowered his head, trembling, as if he knew this man meant no harm. Nate unclasped the metal collar around the puppy's neck, heavy, cold, dark with rust, but what stole his breath was the surface. A line of raised dots, deliberate and orderly. He slid his fingertip across them. Not random scratches. Braille. "My God, who would do this to you?" he whispered, placing the collar into a metal tray, the harsh light bouncing back with a sting. The clinic door suddenly burst open. Wind and rain rushed in, carrying with them the figures of two people. A young woman, cane in hand, her dark hair plastered to her cheeks. Her eyes, pale and clouded, held no light. Beside her stood an older woman, weary in posture but steady in gaze. "Excuse me, are you Dr. Hayes?" the older woman asked, her voice hoarse, trembling. "My daughter. She heard the dog. We followed the sound here." Nate nodded, stepping aside. "Come in. He needs every ounce of kindness he can get." The young woman dropped to her knees beside the table. Her slender hand trembled as it reached out, brushing against Valor's wet fur. And in that instant, the puppy shuddered, then pressed his head into her palm. Not an accident, not reflex, recognition. "I remember him," the young woman whispered. "The smell of wet fur. The cold nose. 5 years ago. In the Franklin fire. A dog like this led me out." The older woman, Eleanor, rested her hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Clara has spoken of it often, but when we searched the records, everything was gone. No trace. No one admitted a dog had ever been there." Nate looked from mother to daughter, then down at Valor. A shiver traced his spine. The pieces began to arrange themselves. The Franklin fire, the missing files, a soldier named Ethan Vaughn who vanished without explanation, and now, this blind Doberman with a braille collar. "Someone wanted to leave a message," Nate murmured, his throat tight. He handed the collar to Eleanor. She turned it over in her hands, the raised dots pressing against her skin. Clara lifted her hand, fingertips gliding slowly across the metal. She traced each symbol, one by one, as if her fingers could see. With every dot, her body trembled. She hadn't read the full message, but her heart already knew. This was not meant for the many. It was meant for those who could navigate darkness. She bent closer to Valor, whispering through tears. "You still remember me, don't you? After everything, you still found me." Valor raised his paw, weak but deliberate, and placed it in her hand. A gesture small in size, infinite in meaning. The storm still roared outside, battering the windows, but inside the white-walled room, a truth had begun to reveal itself. A blind dog, a blind girl, and a collar carved with braille, all tethered together by a fire that had nearly killed them 5 years ago. Nate took in the scene, the weight of it pressing into his chest. He knew from this moment forward he was no longer just a veterinarian. He had been drawn into something larger, an unfolding journey where even his own life might have to be risked. And it all began with the fragile breath of a blind Doberman puppy named Valor. The next morning, the storm had passed. Ashford emerged beneath a damp veil of fog, its streets pitted and scarred, as if the town had not yet recovered from a night of violence. The tang of sea salt lingered in the air, mingling with the faint scent of smoke that still drifted from the ruins of Franklin Market. The whole town felt as though it had woken from a nightmare, yet everyone knew the shadows had not truly retreated. Inside the small clinic at the end of Harbor Road, the cold white light glared down on the steel table. Valor lay curled beneath a thick blanket, his tiny body scrubbed clean of mud. His breathing was shallow but steadier, each fragile rise of his chest insisting that his heart refused to surrender. Each faint movement tugged at the bandages around his shoulder. a quiet reminder of the narrow space between survival and death. Dr. Nate Hayes sat motionless in a wooden chair beside him. A cup of black coffee had long gone cold at his elbow, untouched. His eyes never left the metal collar resting in a tray. Under the light, the raised braille dots gleamed faintly, as though they wanted to speak but chose silence instead. He closed his eyes, and a single word surged back into memory. Franklin. The fire 5 years ago. The blaze that devoured the market, erased patient files, and swallowed the trail of a missing soldier. Ethan Vaughn. Nate could still see the thick columns of smoke clawing into the sky, still hear the screams tangled in the crack of collapsing timber. Time had not dulled those images. When he opened his eyes again, his voice was raw from a sleepless night. "We have to go back to where it all began." Clara turned her head toward him, her clouded eyes fixed on the sound of his voice. She sat close to Valor, her hand tracing the pup's trembling back, feeling the warmth of his fragile body. "I remember the smoke," she whispered, "the snapping of wood. The heat is rushing against my face. If Valor survived, he can lead us there." Eleanor shuddered, her composure faltering. She had buried that night deep inside, but hearing her daughter's words tore the memory loose. Lila Grant, Nate's young assistant, stood by the doorframe, her expression lit with resolve. "I'll go too," she said firmly. "If anything was hidden, we'll find it." That afternoon, the four of them returned to Franklin. The road into the market was mottled with puddles from last night's storm, weeds forcing their way up between fractured stones. Charred beams jutted into the sky like ribs of a skeleton, silent and still against the desolate ground. The acrid stench of smoke clung stubbornly to the walls, as if the fire had never truly died. Nate lowered Valor from his arms. The blind Doberman trembled when his paws met the ground, then lifted his head. His ears pricked sharply, nose twitching as he drew in the air, as though memory itself was etched into his scent. Step by step, shaky but determined, he moved forward. Clara walked beside him, one hand gripping her cane, the other resting gently along his back. Nate felt his throat tighten at the sight. A blind girl and a blind dog, guiding one another through the ashes of the past. They needed no eyes to find the way. Valor stopped before a half-collapsed brick room, the old records office. A low growl rumbled in his throat. Then he pawed fiercely at the rusted door. The clang of metal echoed like a warning bell. Nate and Lila strained together, pulling until the heavy door finally screeched open. Inside, darkness and mildew rushed out to meet them. Bent shelving sagged beneath the weight of charred, half-destroyed files scattered across the damp floor. Nate crouched, lifting one brittle folder after another, his fingers smudged with soot. Then his hand stilled. A hardback ledger, its cover scorched but its pages still legible. Names blurred across the paper. And there, in faded red ink, one stood out, circled heavily. Ethan Vaughn. Beside it, a single note. K9 Unit. Nate's heart thudded. "Dear God," he breathed. At that moment, Lila bent down, reaching beneath a rusted shelf. She pulled free a small object, heavy in her hand, a silver ring engraved with the insignia of the military. She passed it to Nate. His hands trembled as he raised them into the light. Along the band, words were etched deep. For service, for loyalty. Clara stepped forward. Her fingers brushed across the cold metal, tracing the letters like braille. "I heard that name during the fire," she whispered, her voice trembling like leaves in the wind. Vaughn, a man shouting in the flames, and then silence. The room fell still. Only the drip of rainwater from the leaking roof broke the silence, each drop falling like a clock's beat, counting down to revelation. Nate tightened his grip on the ledger with one hand, the ring in the other. He looked at Clara, then at Valor standing in the doorway, ears held high. His voice dropped low, steady as an oath. Someone wanted to bury everything, but Valor, he remembers. He brought us here to uncover the truth. The fading light of evening filtered through a crack in the wall, spilling across Clara's face and catching on Valor's proud silhouette. In that moment, none of them doubted. The journey toward justice had only just begun, and the thread that would lead them forward was not sight, but the memory carried in a blind dog's heart. Ashford was never truly silent. Even on the clearest days, the coastal town echoed with the distant roar of waves and the faint call of foghorns from the old harbor. But that afternoon, as Nate Hayes and his group climbed the stone steps of City Hall, the very air felt heavier. Dark clouds pressed low, extinguishing the light, leaving the uneasy sense that they were stepping into the belly of a beast. The heavy wooden door groaned open, its hinges shrieking like a warning. A long corridor stretched ahead, fluorescent bulbs casting a dim, lifeless glow that did little to banish the shadows. Footsteps echoed, each one joined by the soft click of Valor's claws on the polished floor. The blind Doberman pup pressed close to Clara, ears rigid, nose twitching with tension as if he could smell the danger waiting inside. Their destination, the office of Mayor Robert Dorsey. The man who had ruled Ashford for nearly 2 decades, celebrated as the town's pillar, yet shadowed by suspicion over the Franklin fire. When the door opened, he was already there. Behind a broad oak desk, shelves sagging with dusty files towered at his back. A cigar smoldered between his fingers, smoke curling toward the ceiling, heavy and suffocating, drowning out even the salt air drifting through the cracked window. Dorsey's gaze swept across the group, lingering on Valor. It was not pity for a disabled pup that hardened his eyes. It was the cold stare of a man who had recognized a threat. "Dr. Hayes," he said at last, voice low but laced with disdain. "I hear you still haven't learned how to let the past rest." Nate stepped forward, setting the scorched ledger and the silver ring down on the desk. "We found these in Franklin." Ethan Vaughn. His records erased. Why did his name disappear? And why would a blind puppy wear a collar marked in braille? Dorsey smirked. "Ashes don't speak. And the death of a soldier changes nothing in this town." Clara moved forward, her clouded eyes locked on the direction of his voice. Her words came slowly, each one sharp as a blade. "I heard Vaughn's name in the fire." "I heard your voice," someone shouted, then fell silent. "You expect me to believe it was a coincidence?" The air thickened. Eleanor clutched her daughter's shoulder, trembling herself. Behind them, Lila slipped a hand into her coat pocket, phone screen glowing faintly as she pressed record. Dorsey leaned forward, elbows on the desk. "Who do you think you are? Detectives? Heroes?" He exhaled a ribbon of smoke, his tone dropping colder than steel. "K-9s are not pets. They are tools, trained, sold, and sometimes they disappear." Vaughn wanted to expose it, but he chose the wrong side. Nate's fists clenched, his voice exploding across the room. "They are living beings, not commodities." His words rattled the walls, but Dorsey only chuckled, a dry laugh born of a man convinced power would always shield him. The back door burst open. 2 large men in black suits entered. One blocked the exit, the other advanced, eyes hard. Clara instinctively gripped her cane, Eleanor pulling her close. Valor growled. The sound was low, guttural, but it filled the room, vibrating with defiance. He stepped forward, planting himself in front of Clara, tiny body trembling but ears erect, teeth bared. The guard sneered, bending down to shove him aside. In a blur, Valor lunged, jaws clamping onto his sleeve. Fabric tore, the sound slicing the silence. Dorsey slammed his palm against the desk, the thunderclap of wood echoing. Chaos erupted. Eleanor shielded Clara, and Nate yanked Lila back toward the corner. In the scramble, Lila shoved her phone into Nate's pocket. The recording continued, capturing every word. The guard flung Valor off, the small pup hitting the floor with a cry that cut through everyone's chest. But he staggered back up, trembling, lips curled, growl still rumbling. Each step he forced forward was a challenge, as if declaring, "I will not retreat." Dorsey glared down, eyes bloodshot with rage. The words that fell from his lips froze the room, branding the air with dread. "That Doberman is the last piece of evidence, and evidence must be erased." Silence collapsed over the office, heavy and suffocating. Nate could hear the pounding of his own heart. And there, in the center of it all, stood Valor. Small, blind, broken. Now marked as the target of Ashford's darkest power. 5. Night fell over Ashford as if the entire town had been swallowed whole by darkness. The empty streets echoed only with the whistle of the wind and the weak glow of yellow streetlights. Nate gripped the wheel of his old pickup, knuckles white, heart pounding hard in his chest. In the back seat, Clara and Eleanor pressed close together, while Lila cradled Valor in her arms. The blind Doberman pup panted, clouded eyes wide, ears twitching at every strange sound. He knew they were being followed. The rear-view mirror betrayed the truth. 2 pairs of headlights, trailing close behind. Nate clenched his jaw. "They won't let us go." A black car surged forward, slamming against the side of the truck. Metal screamed. Eleanor cried out, and Clara clutched her cane tight, her body shaking. In the chaos, Valor pushed up from Lila's arms, a low, rasping growl rising from his chest. The pup threw himself toward the window, as if he could shield them all. "Hold him!" Lila shouted, but the little dog showed no fear. He growled like a soldier on the field, though he was nothing more than a blind, fragile pup. A gunshot cracked, the back window shattered, cold wind tearing through, the sharp stench of gunpowder mixing with rain. Nate swerved, the truck lurching. In that split second of fate, a small black shape launched forward. Valor leapt between Lila and the bullet. His tiny body jerked as the round tore through his shoulder. A scream ripped from him, then silence. "No!" Lila's voice broke, raw and strangled. Blood spread across Valor's black and tan fur, spilling down her arms. Nate slammed his foot on the gas, the truck roaring down a deserted road toward the clinic. The car behind them faded, but the air inside the cab was thick with despair. The clinic blazed with emergency light. Nate laid Valor on the steel table, his hands trembling in a way they never had before. "Bandages! Adrenaline! Now!" His voice cut sharply. An old command barked from the depths of urgency. Lila ran for supplies, and Eleanor clutched Clara as both women sobbed. The bullet had torn through his shoulder. Blood poured fast. Valor's breathing slowed, faltered. Nate pressed gauze hard against the wound, his own chest searing. "Don't you leave me, son. Not yet. Not like this." The monitor beeped faintly, its rhythm fragile, slipping. Nate injected adrenaline, his hands shaking as he drove the needle in. "Breathe, boy. Come on. Just a little more." In the haze between worlds, Valor whimpered. Clara stepped forward, hands outstretched, searching. Her fingers brushed his blood-soaked fur. The puppy stirred, lifting one paw and laying it into her palm. A fragile gesture. Yet it froze the room. "Oh, God." Eleanor whispered. "He's binding us together." Tears streaked Lila's face as she bent close. "Don't give up, baby. You have to live, to prove we were right." Time stretched, heavy, merciless. An hour passed. 2. Nate worked tirelessly, stitching wound after wound, wiping away blood, setting the IV. Sweat drenched his brow, his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion, but he never stopped. He had saved countless lives before, but never had he felt he was fighting for his own heart as he did now. Outside, the storm finally eased. The moon broke through the clouds, and inside that cramped little room, the monitor changed, a steady beep. Then another. The heartbeat grew stronger, clearer. Valor's breaths deepened. His chest rose and fell with fragile defiance. Clara burst into tears, shoulders shaking. Eleanor wrapped her arms around her daughter, her own eyes glistening. Lila seized Nate's hand, her voice breaking. "You brought him back." Nate looked down at the pup, vision blurred with tears. Valor, the blind, battered Doberman, had clawed his way back from death's edge. And in that moment they all knew he was not just a dog. He was the thread weaving them together, strangers now transformed into a family. Valor shifted slightly, his small paw still resting in Clara's hand. A weary breath escaped him, heavy yet full of meaning. Nate whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. "He chose to shield us. Now it's our turn, to shield him." And the truth he carries, inside the small clinic at the end of Harbor Road, the IV drip ticked steadily. Valor lay curled on his blanket, breathing hard but steady. Each time his eyelids flickered open, Nate swore the whole room brightened a little. Outside the window, dawn broke over Ashford. The town seemed scrubbed clean after the storm, yet in their hearts, the tempest had not passed. Clara sat beside Valor, her hand cradling his tiny paw. She managed a faint smile, though her eyes were raw from sleeplessness. "He still wants to tell us something." Nate turned the old collar over in his hands. Under the daylight, the braille marks stood out sharper. He took a sheet of paper and began tracing the dots with his fingertip, stringing them into words. "If anyone still believes in forgiveness, please take me home." The room fell silent. Eleanor covered her mouth. Clara's tears spilled freely. Lila lifted her phone, recording the message as Nate read it aloud, his voice slow and steady, not only for the people in the room, but for an entire town that needed to hear it. News spread faster than the wind. Lila sent the recording and photos of the collar to a reporter she trusted. Within hours, the story flooded social media, then appeared on the evening news. Blind Doberman puppy, survivor of the Franklin fire, carries a hidden message exposing the truth long buried. Ashford stopped, stunned, then erupted. Cafes buzzed with talk. Families whispered at dinner tables. Those who had doubted the fire's mystery now stood up, furious at being deceived for so many years. Children were the first to turn outrage into action. By morning, chalk messages bloomed across the sidewalks downtown. For Valor. Dogs are not tools. Justice for Vaughn. Awkward handwriting, but radiant, flowers blooming on gray cement. Watching from a distance, Eleanor whispered, "A little dog stirred an entire town." The following night, Ashford Square overflowed. Candles flickered in every hand. Signs lifted high. Posters bore Valor's image, his clouded eyes, his frail body, yet his face unyielding. On the makeshift stage stood Clara, with Nate, Eleanor, and Lila beside her. Clara gripped the microphone. Her voice trembled at first, but grew stronger with every word. "Valor cannot see, but he has shown us the way. He pulled me from the fire 5 years ago, and this week he saved us again. He does not know fear, he only knows loyalty, yet some would erase him, as if he were nothing more than a tool. The crowd fell utterly still, only the wind stirring through a sea of candles. Clara raised her chin, voice ringing. "We cannot allow those in power to bury the truth." Valor risked his life to keep it alive. Now it is our turn to speak. The chant began as a murmur, then roared across the square. For valor, for Vaughn, for justice. Light spread, candles linking street to street, a fire that could not be extinguished. By the next day, national news crews poured into Ashford. The story of a blind Doberman puppy swept across the country, leaving people shaken. Hundreds of letters, thousands of signatures flooded the state capitol, demanding an inquiry into the Franklin fire and the K9 trafficking ring. Nate watched it all, dazed. He was only a small-town veterinarian, yet now his little clinic had become the center of a movement. Neighbors arrived with flowers, cards that read, "Thank you, Valor." In the recovery room, Valor still lay weak, but his ears lifted each time the noise outside swelled. It was as if he understood. He had become a symbol, not just for one fire, not just for Vaughn, but for every living being once treated as a tool. Clara leaned close, whispering softly, "He gave us back our eyes. Now we must give him justice." Autumn came slowly to Ashford. Maples along the main street blazed gold, their leaves scattering across the steps of City Hall, steps that, only a year ago, had been shrouded in darkness, now shining with candles and the chant of, "For Valor." The story had not stayed in Ashford. National broadcasts, newspapers, and online networks carried it everywhere. The blind Doberman who survived the Franklin fire, who shielded lives with his frail body, who wore a collar inscribed with a message in braille. In the end, the pressure grew too great for any politician to ignore. One morning in early October, the state legislature passed the Valor Act, a law declaring that K9s were not disposable tools but living beings, entitled to care and protection, with those who used them bearing both civil and moral responsibility. Live coverage filled the square in Ashford. Hundreds gathered, tears streaming, as the words "Valor Act approved" flashed across the giant screen. Candles were lit again, but this time not for mourning, this time for celebration. Inside the recovery room at the Harbor Clinic, Valor lay on his own bed. His fur was still scarred. His clouded eyes saw nothing, but his breathing was stronger now, his heartbeat steady. Each time Clara entered, the pup lifted his head, ears twitching, paws stretching out by instinct, seeking her hand. Clara sat beside him, Eleanor at her side, with Nate and Lila standing close. They exchanged no words. They didn't need to. In their eyes lived the same truth: family. Not by blood, but forged by the loyalty and sacrifice of one small life. At the public ceremony for the Valor Act, Clara stepped onto the stage. Before hundreds of townsfolk and the unblinking lenses of national cameras, she gripped the microphone. Her hands trembled, but her voice rang clear. Forgiveness is not forgetting. Forgiveness is architecture. We rebuild the future brick by brick, with truth and with compassion. Valor forgave us, even when abandoned, even when treated as a tool. He still chose love, and because of him, we remember that justice is not for revenge, but for the protection of what is most fragile. Applause thundered, rolling across the square, mingling with the autumn wind. Behind her, Nate stood silent as Lila carried Valor onto the stage. The small pup, scarred and blind, lifted his head proudly. A hush swept through the crowd. No one spoke, but all understood. This was not just an animal. This was a living torch of a movement. Children pushed to the front, waving papers scrawled with shaky words. "Thank you, Valor. We love you." One little girl laid a new collar before him, not cold metal, but soft leather, marked in raised letters. Home. Clara broke down, bending to hold Valor close. Eleanor clasped her daughter's hand, her own vision blurred with tears. Lila met Nate's eyes, and without a word, both knew they were witnessing one of those rare moments that could change how society looked at every voiceless creature. When night fell, Ashford glowed with candles and street lamps. The crowd refused to leave the square. They told one another small stories, of a dog guiding an old man across the road, of a cat sleeping beside a boy who had lost his father, of creatures without human words, who still knew how to love and how to give. Valor slept in Clara's arms, blind eyes closed, breath steady. Even in dreams, his paw rested in her hand. That simple gesture, so small yet so profound, reminded everyone that the deepest connections need no language. A year later, Ashford had changed. On the wall of the city hall, new words were carved. For valor, for justice, for hope. In the square stood a statue, a small Doberman, head lifted, ears standing tall. Beneath it, Clara's words etched in stone. Forgiveness is not forgetting, but rebuilding the future. Parents brought their children to touch the statue, not just to remember a dog, but to remember the lesson. That love and compassion can transcend even the silence of language. And Valor, the blind, scarred, unyielding Doberman, lived on in their hearts, not as a victim, but as an immortal symbol, a reminder that sometimes the smallest among us hold the power to stir the conscience of an entire community. In a world deafened by noise, Valor never needed words. He needed only one act, to lay his paw into a human hand, and that single act awakened thousands of hearts.